talking more about servlets technology. In the last session, just for reminding and recollecting what we have done, we have seen how you can develop servlets, basic servlets with the help of servlet interface, generic servlet, and then we stopped at looking at HTTP, creating how you can create HTTP servlet. So we'll have a look at it, and then we'll look at servlet lifecycle. And some of your students asked how actually the servlet mapping is done. So I told them an answer, which is like the Tomcat actually takes care of how the servlet mapping is done. But I thought of some other explanation where it includes from starting point of the request is submitted and how the backend actually works. So I'll try to explain that because it will give you some picture since a student has asked me. So it will actually help us understand how any web application request or any request that has been handled by a web application will be executed and sent back to the server as a response. So is my voice audible to everybody?
Yeah, Aditya, it's audible. I have one question actually. Yesterday you
Yeah,
told,
sure. Ask.
yeah, yesterday you told like if we give packages for Java classes, we need to give that full package in web.xml, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
What is the structure like? We distinguish with slash or dot. How can we give?
Okay. So now, say you have something like this, okay?
Yeah.
And so let so, so okay, so we're doing word wrap here. Now, if you see the question you asked, it would be dot
Yeah.
uh, like whatever you used in Java file.
Okay. Yeah, Aditya, I got you. Thank you.
Okay, so basically what we do is while defining a package, this syntax should be followed, like com and your company name and the package, whatever the package is having, it will have all the controllers. So the package will have the controller and then login controller. So you have to mention in this manner wherever a fully qualified name should be
Yeah,
given.
the thing is actually while creating a Java class, actually a package is created and while executing the program, it is showing like resource is not found. Then I followed your process like keeping the package name as default. Then the program executed. So that's why I asking.
Okay,
Yeah.
actually what is happening there is, Eclipse actually does lots of things for us.
Yeah.
See, whenever I didn't create actually the default package at the time of creating the application. See, like creating the dynamic project. a dynamic project, you give some name. So for example, first as a project name, okay, it's already there. When you go to next, is asking to configure project first. So this one we are selecting, and what happens after that is automatically when you click on finish, inside the first one, project name src. Whenever you create a class, it is asking whether you want to create it in default package or not. I mean, it is like creating. There is no package for it. The
Yeah,
user
actually
default package is
in my
Servletsdo.
Eclipse the package name is it's like already displaying the package name. So when I make package name as empty, on the top it is displaying a message like no pack default package name is discouraged.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So those kind of suggestions would be given. And in my Eclipse, it is showing as default package,
Yeah.
but it is not a name actually. It
Yes,
is just
still if I use that in my Eclipse also it's showing like that only. No problem.
oh, fine, fine, fine.
Yeah,
Okay, fine.
thank you.
So, I was discussing like we have seen how you can create a servlet with the help of generic servlet. Okay, we have seen that, and then servlet, generic servlet we have seen by just implementing the service method. And now the third one we have to look at is the HTTP servlet. I guess we did not see how we can use HTTP servlet. Okay, so HTTP servlet, as you can see from the diagram, it is actually an abstract class which is extending from generic servlet. And in HTTP servlet, there is only one method you have to override, that is either do get or do post. And the syntax would be since it's a class, we give extends HTTP servlet, and then okay. So you have to either override do get or you have to either override do post method. Do-get method is defaultly called if you don't mention any method that is calling from the browser. If you mention do-post, then you have to override do-post method. There are two HTTP methods which can be called depending on the method you give on the form type. Okay, so and you would be wondering, or maybe you have a doubt how you can send the get or post HTTP method from the browser. Say, for example, if there is a form and then you are mentioning some URL pattern to it. In the same form, you have an attribute called method which says what is the type of HTTP method you want to call on the server. This is like a mandatory thing we have to give to the any request, but we generally tend to forget it. When you don't mention anything, it will take a default as get request, because get is the default HTTP request that will be sent by the browser if the developer doesn't specify any method. Okay, so but if you specify get or post, depending on the method, that particular function will be called. This is a method, right? Not a function. This is a method, right? So that method will be called. So it is the responsibility of the browser or the client to send what is the HTTP method it should be calling on the server. Okay, so this is one way, and the other way is if you are using Ajax. Okay, if and you are using jQuery. Okay, so this is a syntax which we used to call Ajax call in jQuery. First parameter is URL, and the second one is the method, whether it is get or post, and the third one is the data. Data is nothing but the request params that we are sending it to the server. Uh, so these are the two ways you can submit a request from the client to the browser. So in either ways, you have to mention the URL. There are two mandatory things. First one is what is the URL pattern that you want to call, and second one is what is the method you call on the server, be it get or post. Okay, so now, so since we have seen how you can do that, we'll look at how you can implement that in actual scenario. So as I've told you, the syntax would be public class your servlet name, which is extending servlet, and you have to either override do get or do post. This will remove it for now. This is just for overriding. Okay. So now what we're doing, we are overriding the do get method, which is a default one. We'll look at how you can override do post also. And there are two parameters that it is being defaultly taken. One is HTTP servlet request, and the other one is HTTP servlet response. And all other things are same. We are just printing a system.out.println, and using a print writer object, we are sending some value. Okay, this is just a value, or we can do. Okay, so we are just sending a response, and now according to our steps to create servlet, we have just created a servlet by using three of the techniques, and now we are using HTTP servlet. We have overridden duplicate and written some response to the browser, and after that, coming to the web server, I mean web.xml file deployment descriptor, you have to define a servlet tag for it with a servlet name, and then the URL pattern which you want to uh, call the servlet that you have just written. So we are defining a URL pattern as contact in the sample one thing, and then when you click here and say run on server, click on finish. It is starting now. Okay, it started. Let's go and see in the. Okay, and these two things are coming because in web.xml file we have defined a welcome file list mentioning login.html, and this login.html is having that username and password, whatever we have defined here. Okay, that just two input fields, and then a button. Okay, so that is it. And now, if what is the URL pattern? We have the URL pattern as contact. When I click on contact, you can see the response is coming from HTTP servlet and HTTP HTML body and all such stuff it is showing. Okay, so now we have seen how you can call a servlet in three ways. One is HTTP servlet. Now if you put do post, okay, so and open our HTML page. See, it is giving you, and there is no HTML. We are not either calling a form, we are not calling an Ajax call, but still in the earlier example, when you press slash contact, when doGet is is overridden in our HTTP servlet, we are able to see the response. But now when you change that default implementation to post and do the same slash contact, you're not able to see that get implementation is being called. That post, either post is also not being called. The reason behind this is calling get method without any post, without any method is get method is a default implementation that will be called by the browser to the server. That is the reason when you give do get here, even if the method that is coming from the server is not given, it will call the do get. But if it is do post, you have to explicitly call it from the browser. Since we don't have any page to call do post, we are getting this error saying method HTTP get is not supported by this URL. That means HTTP method is not defined here. Say for example, now we'll override both of the things. We'll see how it is done. Okay, so now do get is in overridden. So now you see again the response is coming back because whenever you don't mention anything, it is actually picking do get in place of do post. So this is how the do get is actually coming as default. That is what I wanted to say. Now if you want to mention do post, how can you do that? You may get that doubt, right? So for that, what you will do is we'll go to login.html page. Since this is the page which will be coming initially, we'll change this action to contact. Okay, since we want to call our contact now, and I'll give a method equal to post. Okay, so now I'm mentioning post here, and whenever this form is submitted, it will call the contact URL, which will be picked up by the web.xml file, and the control will go to home page servlet where I'm overriding do post. Okay, so this we'll see now. First we have to load the index.html, where from here we will call the slash contact URL. Okay, let me give the password. So when I click on submit according to the form, if you the form, when you click on submit, the form action will be given to contact, and then the method post will be called. So click on submit, and now see uh, okay, it did not come here. It went to our service method where it is printing hello welcome and this thing. So you see hello welcome and this thing. Because the page is not refreshed, I have to restart the server, close the browser, and all such stuff. Okay, let's stop the server for a minute, close the browser so that it will remove all the cookies, and we'll manually remove the cookies also here, just to make sure that it works fine for our example. Okay, clear browser data. Okay, it is successfully deleted. um, we will clean the project. Okay, now we'll start the server and click run on server. is very fast. Now if you come and see the view source, page view source, you can see the form action as /contact and method as post, and the username and password are already same. Okay, so now when I give something here, okay, when I click on submit, see now you see the report, the response is coming from HTTP servlet. Now this is what is executed, and the response is coming from do post. This is not coming from do get. Okay, so since you have mentioned the post as a parameter, that is the reason we are seeing do post. Okay, so that's it. So we have seen how you can create using HTTP servlet, and the next thing that I wanted to discuss is how actually the request is going onto the server and how it is coming back. Okay, so but before that, there's one more step. We have to look at the servlet lifecycle. Then you will be understanding how and what is happening in behind the scenes in Tomcat. Okay, so whenever we send a request from client to server for a particular servlet, this is what is happens when the servlet is picked up by the Tomcat container, and then how it's actually happening. So the first one, the first lifecycle method in servlet is the servlet loading. Servlet loading is nothing but picking up the bytecode which is there in the classes folder, or which is available in the class loader, and then place that class bytecode into the memory. So this is called as loading. Loading is nothing but it can done it can be done to any Java file, not only to servlet. Whenever you call a Java file, first and foremost that is done by the Tomcat, by the Java, is it will pick up the bytecode which is in the form of ones and zeros, and that bytecode is nothing but the .las file. The .las file will be placed in the uh, memory, which is nothing but the object, which is nothing but in heap an object will be created and the bytecode will be loaded. And after that, what will happen? This is the first stage of servlet lifecycle. And the second thing is initializing the instantiation of. I'm not able to get the word. I'm getting confusion between initialization and instantiation. But yeah, but instantiation is the next uh, lifecycle method which will be executed after the servlet loading is done. And what happens at the time of instantiation? We have a single line here. uh, One second, I've typed all those things. I'm just looking at the. Okay, servlet instantiation is nothing but creating an object for that loaded servlet. Okay, first loading is it will load the bytecode, but object will be created in the second step. Okay, and what is the second step? The third step is servlet initialization. Servlet initialization is nothing but creating the objects that are needed in the servlet. So if you are taking the generic servlet, if you're taking a servlet example, at the time of creation of the initialization, we have seen the init method is called, and the init method, it is taking a servlet config as an object. Let's go and see this one. Okay, so we are at the servlet example. Now at the time of initialization, we have seen an output saying init method is called, if you remember. Okay, and this method is being executed at the time of creation of the object, that is at the time of initialization. And the servlet config, as I've already told you, will be given by the Tomcat itself, and this object will be created at the time of initialization. Here the container will create servlet config object and access the init method. This will be called after the container creates a method, create a object for it, and then it calls the init method inside it. Okay, and the init method can be called with the help of load on startup at the time of server startup. So if you give load on startup value as 0, what happens is at the time of server startup, the servlet lifecycle will be executed. First thing is the servlet bytecode will be loaded, and then instantiation will be done, that means creation of object will be done, and then initialization, that means the init method will be called, because the init method will be called at the time of initialization itself. And at the same time, the servlet config object will be created by the Tomcat, and it will be sent to the init method. And the next stage is uh, request processing in servlet lifecycle. Request processing is nothing but calling the service method and then process the request and then send back the request to the browser, response to the browser, and then the instantiation. So these are the 5 basic steps involved in servlet lifecycle. And whenever you request for a servlet, these things will be executed from top to bottom. Okay, and now we'll see from a diagram how a flow of requests from client to server is happening. Okay, so okay, I have made this JPEG. It is little what you can say, not complex, very compact, and all the things are placed at one place, because with JPEG I can only make this much. But when you look at each step, then you will be understanding everything. Okay, and the notes, whatever I'll be discussing, will be mentioned here, but we'll look at the diagram itself. So first and foremost, this is a request process in case of servlet, implementing servlet, and it will be same for generic servlet and HTTP servlet also. So for that reason, we'll look at servlet example as of now. That means if you're implementing servlet in your Java side, then how this request will be executed. So this is what and the numbering is actually related to the the text that I have given here. Okay, so if you don't understand anything, just please stop me at that point, because there are like 13 steps. You can see the maximum number is 13, so you can stop me at any point, and then if you have any question, we'll start from the beginning. Okay, uh, the first step involved in creation of the request object and sending the response to the uh, server is, first thing is, you have to have a browser, uh, and then you have to type the URL pattern and then send the request. So the leftmost part, if you see the extreme left side, we have a box inside it where I mentioned the URL pattern, and then this is a browser. Okay, so and the outer one is, you can think of it as a machine. So the browser is mentioned and the URL is also given here, and depending on the URL pattern, you are going to call the server, and then and the service onto the Tomcat Java files. Okay, so now first one is, you are calling HTTP localhost colon 8080 first servlet slash first. So what is happening here? Whenever you request something with the first step, the browser will create a virtual. If you see here, the browser will create a virtual socket connection between the server and the browser. And how you can think of it as is, virtual socket is something which you can imaginary think of a connection between the browser and the server. And how it is done is with the help of the IP address and the port number. So since I'm using the local host, you can see local host as my local host and the port number. And basically you may get a question that, Aditya, if I've given www.google.co.in, how it can communicate with the server and the port number, how you can be done. So initially I've told you that each and every website should be hosted uh, in a web hosting server, where it will uniquely give a IP address and a port number on which the application is running, that particular web application is running. But in order to mask in the sense, in order to hide those details to the user, uh, the web hosting, what it will do is, it will give you a hosting site name. That means it will give you a fancy name so that the user or anyone can from the world can access that website using that fancy name. Say for example, in Gmail, you use gmail.com, right, for accessing Gmail, but inside in the back end, the web hosting guys may have configured the gmail.com as, for example, 10.1.2.84 colon 8040. So in the backend, they will mention it like that. So whenever you type gmail.com in the browser, the browser will pick up the request and it will send it to the response and send it to the web hosting service server where it is deployed, and there it will understand that if it is something like gmail.com, it will understand that it should map it to the particular IP address to the particular port. So that is how the connection is made. And in our case, since we are using localhost 8080, localhost is the server which is running in my local, and 8080 is on which the port Tomcat is running. It will create a virtual connection from first to, I mean, from the browser to the server. And there are two lines here. First line is a straight line and there is a bend line. So these are two parts in Tomcat server. First one is the main container, and the second one is the actual container. Okay, you can think of them as uh, two parts. Okay, the first one is main server and the second one is container. Okay, the first line is main server and the second one is container. So now the first step is done. The first step is like you have typed a URL and then you clicked on enter. So the browser actually what it does is it will create a virtual connection between the server and the browser by creating a request format, and the request format will have uh, header will maintain request headers and body part will maintain request parameters. Okay, so now if you go back to the diagram, it is creating a request format. Request format is nothing but a piece of code uh, by which it has the information about the request parameters. It has the information about the browser that it is calling from. It has the information about the system that it is calling from. Okay, all these things information will be created by the browser itself, and the request format will be in this shape. You can think of it in this manner. Okay, it will be a box which is divided into two parts. This is not, this line is not visible. Okay. Okay, so the request format will be in this manner. You can think of it as the box where it has a header part and a body part, and the request header part will have request format. Actually, basically, this is so the request header will have the details about the request. What is the browser? What is the service? What is the browser name? What is the version? What is the language? What is the underlying operating system that the browser is using? All these things will be there in the request header, and the request body will have the request parameters. For example, if you're sending a username and password, then they will be sent in the place of request body. Okay, so that is how the request format is created by the browser itself. You don't need to worry about it. All you have to do is you have to just you mention the URL pattern and click on submit. Okay, and then what happens in the second step, this whatever object that has been created, the request format will be sent to the main server. Okay, in the main server, there are a couple of things that are happening in the main server, and the first one is it will actually check whether the data is well formatted or not. Say, for example, you are sending a username and password, and some URL and some extra data also. Say for example, if the data is syntactically not correct, then the main server will reject the request and send it back to the response saying the request format is not correct. Okay, sometimes it happens when you are not formatting the request body correctly. And I said, and I've already said the request body will be created by the browser, but sometimes it is the job of the developer to send the request body by creating it. Sometimes we make mistakes in creating the request body, so at that point of time the main server will reject the request at the second step itself, and it will say request format is not in correct shape. But if it is in correct format, what would be the next it is doing? It will pick up uh, the name and resource name from the URL pattern, and it will check whether the resource name is HTML, JSP or URL pattern. Okay, so now the request will be sent to the container, which is you can see as a bent curve here. That is, you can imagine as a container. Okay, in container, what it will do is it will check for the URL pattern. If the URL pattern is a HTML page, or if the URL pattern is a JSP page, or is URL pattern a resource which is linked to a servlet. Okay, so it will check whether any of the three are requested. If that first two, like if it is requesting for a JSP or or HTML, the URL pattern will look like this. Okay, uh, local host 8080 my first app slash 1.html. Okay, if it is 1.html, it will directly return the HTML page. Okay, in the same manner, if it is a JSP page, it will return the JSP page. But if it is a URL pattern, okay, so in our case it would be contact. It will go to web.xml file. Okay, so first one, if it's HTML, it will pick up, it will send the HTML as a response. Then and there itself, if it's a JSP page, it will return the JSP page. But if it is an URL pattern, what will happen? If it's a URL pattern, then the container will identify the respective servlet through web.xml file. So in our case, it is a first URL pattern. Then what happens? The control will be going to, as a fourth step, it will go into webinf folder, because web.xml file is present in webinf folder. It will go to webinf folder, and first servlet app is my application folder structure, guys. This is the application folder structures, guys, which is deployed in my server. Okay, so it will directly go into the webinf folder where web.xml file is there. So now, since the URL pattern is first, it will pick up the first URL pattern and identify what is the servlet that has been mapped to this URL pattern in sixth step. Okay, since it in sixth step, it will identify the servlet, and it will, once it identifies successfully, it will go to the classes folder where my servlet is located. Okay, so because classes folder is the place where all the Java classes are located, and if this is not available in this location, then it will directly give you an exception saying class not found exception. Okay, or this is a web application, right? So we'll be getting a resource not available exception, class not found, or similarly in case of specific not available classes, okay. Till now, if you have any questions, you can answer this, because we'll move on to the next part, which is done by the container. So till now this is done all by the main servlet. Okay, if you have any questions, till now till the seventh step. Okay, I don't see this. Okay, so now moving on. Once the class has been loaded, what is the life cycle. Now comes the life cycle and what actually happens. So the first stage we have already seen is from the sequence is servlet loading. So servlet loading. So now what happens? The container will pick up the class file and it will do the loading part. That means it will load the bytecode which involves 10001s. I mean, it is understandable by the system. You can't read it like 1001. Since it's a bytecode, I'm just explaining for easy understanding. Okay, the bytecode will be loaded into the memory by the container from the classes folder. Okay, it is just like if you think of it as there is a class file available in bytecode, it will just load it into the memory. The extreme right hand part is a memory part, guys. So this is where all the servlet lifecycle actually happens. Okay, so this is the container or the first app that is happening, but this is, you can imagine, as the memory. And now after the second step is done, the servlet loading is done. Now what is the second step? We have servlet instantiation. The servlet instantiation is nothing but calling the service method. And how this can be called is the container, it will create a thread in order to access the service method, and it will create an object for this, and the service method is called. So this is called this is called servlet instantiation. And later on we have servlet initialization. Whenever you have a servlet initialization, the init method will be called. As you can see, servlet initialization, this is happening after the ninth step. This you can call it inside the ninth step, because instantiation and installation actually happen immediately after one another, because instantiation will be called whenever you call a service method, and inside service method you will call the init method, and at the time of calling init method you create the Tomcat container will create as the servlet config object, and then it is passed to init method. If you see in the servlet, if you are using if you're implementing servlet, the init method is taking servlet config as default object. Okay, and this object is created by Tomcat itself. You don't need to worry about it. The Tomcat will create lots of things at the time of servlet instantiation and installation. So this is just one part. Okay, so now the init method is called by creating the servlet config object. Okay, and later on, once a init method is called, once a service is being executed, you have to get the request and response object, because if you come and see the service, it is expecting the request and response object. Who is creating request and response object? I mean, as a developer, I'm not creating the request and response object, and at the same time, I'm not calling the service method also. But who is creating it for me? Who is calling it for me? The Tomcat again. The Tomcat container again comes into picture, since it is calling the servlet instantiation, the service method. It will take care of creating the request and response object. And when it is done in the 11th step. It is done by creating a request object. This round is a request object, and the next round is a response object. So these two things are created at the time of instantiation and they will be sent to the service method. From request object we'll have the parameters whatever given in the URL, and to the request object we'll set the HTML page. Okay, and after the response is created, once the response is created, the control goes back to the container, and from container it will go back to the main server. So the main server, it will create a request and response header again. Dispatching response. So after getting dynamic response, the container generated thread will reach an endpoint. Okay, and the response will be sent back to the client using the protocol. Here the header part will maintain the okay, response format. Yeah, so this is what I was looking for. Now, as this is actually response format, mistakenly I've typed it like this. Like how you can create a request format while sending the request to the browser, to the from the browser to the client server. In the same manner, from the server to the client, a response header will be created where the format will be again checked by the main server. If the response format is not correct, it will send back the response to the client, and then to the server, and then it rechecks it. Once the response comes back to the main server, as in shown in the 12th step, if it is well formatted, the 13th step will be executed, like sending the response header to the HTML page, and the response is rendered on a HTML page depending on the type of technology that you work on UI. So here it is just a HTML or a text that is being sent from the service. We are seeing a simple text here. Hello first servlet response, but this is the main. So now the request is processing is done once the request object, but there are once the request reaches the you know browser, it is not the end of the request and response object, but there are some other things which are happening. Once a request and response object here comes here, the browser, I mean the container will destroy the request and response object, and it will deinstantiate the servlet from the memory, and then destroy the request object, and deinstantiation is done, and then servlet unloading is done. That means from the memory the servlet unloading is done, the bytecode will be removed from the server, and destroy will be called at the same time. So this is the overall life cycle of a request object coming from the browser to a server, and how it is sent back to a sent back as a response to the browser. Okay, so if you have any questions in this, you can ask me now. We'll be discussing about that. No questions, is it clear? Okay, fine. So, I have a question. Did you guys practice whatever has been discussed in the last class, like generic servlet creation? If you have created like as the student has done, you might have got some scores, you are successful in creating a first servlet. If yes, then I'll be very happy. If no, then please go and practice. Okay, so basically this is a response and request format. We'll look at it one more time. So the user clicks on URL pattern, the browser creates a request format, and it will create a virtual connection between the container and the browser. And from the request format is sent to the main server. It will check whether for the well formation, if the well formness is good, and then the container, the main server will send the request to the container, and the container will check whether it is a JSP page, HTML page, or is another source. If it is JSP or HTML, it will directly send request response. If it is URL pattern, then it will go to the web.xml file, since URL patterns are configured there, and it will pick up the URL pattern, matching URL pattern with the servlet. The servlet will be picked up by the web.xml file from the classes folder, and once the classes folder is picked up successfully for a particular servlet, then servlet life cycle will start. The servlet loading will be happening in the first stage, where servlet loading is nothing but it is importing the bytecode into the Java memory, and after it is nothing happening here. It is just loading the class code, and after that it will do the instantiation. So for doing the instantiation, the container will create, to access the servlet to do the instantiation, it will call the servlet service method, and before calling the service method, the instantiation is done by calling the init method and creating the servlet config object. And since in order to create the we have to call the service method, since the service method is sent back the are nothing but the name value pairs where you see the parameters at the time of uh, accessing the request object or while at the time of processing the request. For example, say you have request object request dot set attribute. Okay, so this is the place where you actually set the attributes. These are called as dynamic attributes, which will be set at the time of request processing. Okay, so we'll say request. Okay, this is how you can create attributes, and attributes data will be stored on the request after the creation of the request object. So that attributes are called as dynamic data for request object. Request object, there are two types of data as what we mentioned. One is request parameters, another one is request attribute. So to get the value of a particular parameter from request object, we use the following thing. So this one we already know. We have used username and password updated, and this will always return a string. That's why you mentioned it in the string. So setting the attribute is done by the developer always, but setting the request attribute is done by request parameter is done by browser, but request attribute it is always done by a developer. And how you can do it? You can do it with the help of setter attribute. It is a name value pair. You can set some name and value. Okay, and to get the value from an attribute from request object, we use the following get attribute. You can get it. So now we have to call the slash home. So we'll change this slash home so that we'll get the package and request attribute and request param also same here. So let me close the browser, restart. I'll click on run on server. That will clean it. Run it.
బాత్రూంలో రాత్రి పోసిండ్రా దాన్ని కార్పెట్ను
అట్లా ఉంది ఫుల్ వాటర్ వాటర్ అంతా
కిందనే పోతున్నాను.
So now if you come and see in the service, we will not choose a parameter, but this is how the attributes can be sent. For example, if you want to send some extra data, this is how you can do it. So these are the two types of request. Which kind of attributes that you can save, or two types of data that can be saved in the request object. Okay, and one you already know,
Aisha,
two we have just discussed.
Aisha,
Sorry.
Aisha,
Yeah.
Aisha. Other students not joined today, Ganesh. I mean, can we hold the, we continue tomorrow?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, Aisha.
Yes.
Yeah, only one student joined today. Can we continue tomorrow?
Yeah. We can do that. Sure. No problem. We can stop it.
Aisha,
మైక్ పెట్టి చెప్పు
Aisha,
అందరికీ కొంచెం కన్ఫ్యూజన్ వచ్చింది
is it fine for you?
డ్యూ టు టైం
Yeah, it's fine
డిలేట్స్
for
అయ్యి
me.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
రేపు చెప్తాం
Yashwa will continue tomorrow, okay?
యశ్వంత్
యా ఓకే యా ఓకే
Yeah, thank you.
actually there is a problem with the time actually daylight saving.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's the same time was fine for you, right, Yashwa?
Yeah, Indian timings 8 from tomorrow.
Yeah, India time 8.
Yeah.
India time 8.
ఫర్
Yeah.
That's because the same India time, basically.
Yeah, then from today onwards it's 9:30 here.
Yeah, I'll inform to the students also.
Okay, okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye, thank you.
Yeah, actually, the daylight saving is done. Okay, maybe I'll change the inform to our students, okay?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Take your time. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
నేను ఒక్కనే ఆడింతసేపు ఏదైనా ఆడినా అని మొత్తుకున్నాను